Okay, welcome to lectures 5 and 6, which we'll get onto today. Before we start, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. Um, the first one has to do with the tutorial. So how I've been, we're actually supposed to have two tutorials of 1 hour each. And the way we've been doing it is doing one tutorial of 2 hours. So um, are you guys fine with that, or would you rather assign yourself to one tutorial or the other? And then, yep.
Is it 2 hours after the second lecture?
It's 1 hour and then 1 hour after the second lecture, yes. So it's two 1 hour tutorials after the second lecture. So the way that yes, but that's how it's supposed to be, because it's supposed to be there's only supposed to be 20 students in each tute. Yeah, so there's a bit more than 20. So I'm happy just to go until you guys are done. But then if you guys want to spend an hour doing something else and then come back for the second tute, that's fine too. But if you look at, otherwise we'll do it like we did last week, which was just basically you guys working together on your group assignments. And then I get round to you when I get round to you. And then last week we finished about 7:15. So what do you think? Do you think anything about this? Don't change anything? Keep going as before? Okay, so we'll agree to just do what we did last week, which is just to have the tutorial for up to 2 hours. Doesn't have to be, because once you guys are done, then you guys can go. You just have to remind me who I saw first last week, and then I won't see them first this week, just to get everyone a chance to go first. The other thing is with the drafts. I got an email from Alif yesterday about the draft. If you're ready to give me a draft the day before the class, then just bring it to class to be fine. But we can probably work things out in class. If not, then I can take it away and give it a closer look if required. Okay. Now the third thing is. This is the first week this is the week of the first ISCQ survey, the Student Experience Survey, which you will find a link to on the page before you get to your Canvas page on. So please go and have a look at that that survey and fill it in. The reason why it's important is there's a few reasons as to why it's important. First of all, we do use the comments that we get from people through this survey. It's an anonymous survey, by the way, so we don't know who's writing what. Well, the unit conveners don't know. IT have a way to find out. So if you're making sort of bomb threats against me, then obviously I'll have to report it, and IT will go and find you. But really, the aim for this is for you to just speak candidly about any concerns you have about the unit as we go along, so that we can address it and make it better for you guys as we go through. Okay, so that's the first use of the ISCQ, which is very useful. And every unit that I am the convener of in architecture, I look at the comments that I get back very carefully, so that I can actually address them. Yeah, and if it's something that I need to talk to you all about so that we can discuss as a group, I will. Otherwise, I will just have a go at fixing up or at addressing the concerns. Obviously, if you want a barista in the corner, that one I don't think I can do that. But in terms of the unit itself, you're pointing to ceiling tile. Yes, that's right. So no one is sitting underneath it, so that's good. But the other thing is that not only is it a way for you to communicate with me anonymously and therefore speak freely, not worry about me. It's the reason why it's anonymous is so that you can feel confident to say what you need to say. Okay, and I do invite you guys to do that. The other reason for it is that it is the way by which I'm rated by the university. Okay, so that's the main reason why it's important for you guys to go and fill it in, because you guys, some of you might think that you don't, that everything's fine and you don't need to respond. If that's the case, please respond and say everything's fine. Yeah, because at the end of the day, of course, the people with concerns are going to make their comments, which is of course what we want. But on the same note, we also want the ratings to be, the survey to be representative of the whole class. And so for me, it's important that those things are representative. I'm not telling you to say nice things about me. I just like you all to engage in this process, especially those who don't usually engage, to help me out, so that in the end, when Upstairs pulls up my reviews, at least everybody's had a go at it, so I can say, whatever the result is, it's a true representation of the class. Okay, so if you've probably already noticed it when you've gone to your Canvas, so please go there and share your comments with me anonymously, and give me or give the unit some ratings, please, if you don't mind. Okay, so today we'll talk about two things. Last week's lecture was so dense that I purposely left out going through all the documents to do with building approval and the architect's responsibility. So I think we'll spend the first little bit of this lecture going through those bits and pieces. And then after that, I will talk about development approvals and how that process works. Now, so really what I want to show you today is these drawings. So basically to show you what development approval drawings look like in terms of building approval, because of course development approvals need to be gotten before building approvals, if they're required at all. And then we'll look at what building approval drawings look like in terms of the actual permit itself. In the context of Victoria, ACT is quite similar. And also the architectural and structural drawings. And I'll also load these documents up on the Moodle, on the Canvas, so that you can go back and have a look at them. And then we'll also go through the other documents, the specifications, the Bell rating, and the energy rating. The Bell rating is the bushfire rating that we have in Victoria. Do you have that do we have that in the ACT as well?
Yes.
We do. Okay. Yes. Ever since the big bushfires, they've got this new rating system in. You need to get a rating on your property so that they can so that the building certifier can determine whether anything special needs to happen in terms of construction. So let me just go to find those documents. Okay, so the first thing I will show you is what a planning approval letter looks like. So this was a renovation in Castlemaine in Victoria, which came under the Mount Alexander Shire Council. So essentially, there is a letter which let me see if I can zoom in. So you can see here, basically, they explicitly say, "I am pleased to advise that your planning permit has been granted." Okay, so they must say that, and then they give a number of conditions to do it. In this case, basically that it is subject to the approval is subject to the development complying with all conditions containing within it. So essentially, what they're saying there is that the building approval, the next stage of works, has to be exactly the same as the planning approval. And there is also a condition, which means that there is also a condition that for most planning or development approvals that they need to be completed in a certain time. That the building works need to be completed in a certain time. So really, that needs to be taken. That has to be noted as well when the development approval is going to run out. And if it is going to run out while you're still under construction, then what you need to do is you need to apply for an extension. These things are pretty easy to get in terms of extensions, but they're easy to get when they are applied for before the due date. Okay, so that is the important thing. Once they've lapsed, then it becomes a lot more difficult. So just moving right along down there. So what you can see here is that these are the conditions that they've got there, which say that there's no layout alteration, which means that it cannot be changed from the stamp drawings, which I'll show you in a tick, and also that 2 years is what the development approval is valid for. So everything needs to be done within that 2 years. Okay, so most important that we follow those things. Now, then there's also a few notes that go along with it. But most importantly, there's the drawings that I submitted with it as well. And what you can see is that I've got the stamp over here, the stamp up here to say how many sheets there are, what the planning number is. It's signed by an officer and it's dated also. So that then tells us when our 2 years actually starts. Yep. And then this is the existing and demolition plan. So you can see the stuff that I'm proposing to demolish dashed, as well as the stuff that I'm proposing to keep. The next plan is actually the proposed plan. So you can see that this is all the existing building here, and then this is what I'm proposing. So what the permit says is basically I cannot move any of the walls inside, and really I cannot change this layout at all. So at this stage, really what we're trying to do is to give the planning authorities as much information as they need to give me a permit, but not to lock us into too many things. So what I try not to do is to give construction. Just to keep the construction vague. We do need to give finishes and what have you in some cases, but certainly I have to give dimensions for everything, which they will then check against. And then the elevations here. You notice there's no sections here, but the elevations here basically give what all the external finishes are going to be. It actually goes through the new bits as well as the old bits and what, if anything is going to happen. So where there's no work, I very clearly mark that there's no work in those things. Okay, so that the development authorities know exactly what I'm trying to do. They know what it's going to look like. They know how high it's going to be, and so on and so forth. So once you have that, and we'll talk more about development approvals in the next lecture, but once we've got our development approval drawings, then and only then can we think about building approval. So if I go to the next set of drawings here, which is the building permit. Okay, so this is for the same project here. So what the building permit is it actually says that it's a building permit, or in the ACT it would say building approval. It has a number, and it's a standard form underneath the under the Building Act. Okay, so all these things, the format of these things are determined by legislation in all jurisdictions. So as we learned from my slip up last week, in the ACT, you can actually get a building permit without a builder, because in the ACT you need to apply for a commencement permission, basically. But in Victoria, once you've got the building permit, you can start building, so you need to have the builder on board. But needless to say, the key takeaway from this is that you must have a builder on board before you start construction. So this is an example from Victoria. So what you have, of course, is the property details. You need to have who the client is, you need to have the property details, and you need to have the builder. Okay, and then any other practitioners that may be involved. So you can see that my name is down there, the builder's name is down there, and the structural engineer is down there, and the registration numbers are also listed there, which then demonstrates that the building certifier has actually gone and checked all of these things. Further down, it's just got some small details about the works, and you can see that the cost of building work, and this was in 2013, the cost of the building work was $157,184. So in terms of scope, it's quite a small renovation. Okay, it's nothing grand. However, regardless of the cost of the works, there's a certain amount of due diligence and documentation that has to be done to try and avoid the kind of problems that Greg Breckenridge was talking about last week. So the building permit itself is also limited by dates. So the certifier has actually given that the work must commence by a certain date and must be completed by a certain date. Okay, and that's just to ensure that this thing is a finite thing and doesn't sort of go on forever and ever, and has to start at a certain time. Now, you remember me talking about the mandatory inspections from last week's lecture. Here they are. Okay, so these things are all listed on the building permit itself, just to remind all involved that these are the things that the building certifier will want to look at during the construction, and all these things are set out as per the building regulations. So I won't talk too much about this stuff, but they remind. The building certifier reminds us here that we need to follow all planning conditions and development approvals. Plumbing work must be carried out by a licensed plumber. Proposed downpipes and what have you must be connected to legal point of discharge. There's a whole stack of conditions here, which are really standard things, but they put it in just as a reminder of what we need. Now. Then what we got here is to have the approval of Colaban Water, which is the water authority that to make that connection, to make that stormwater connection and the plumbing connection. And then let me see. And then this is again a plumbing plan to basically show where all the mains are and where we are to connect. Bit small, so I'll leave you to have a look at it yourself. This one here was a newish thing when we were doing this project, because this one here gives you the Bell ratings for all of the things. So basically, our site was rated as a Bell 12.5, which I'll show you in a little bit, and then these are all the requirements for Bell 12.5. So. Really, in terms of roofing, we need to conform to these specific specifications. You can see here in terms of windows. Let me just go in a bit. You can see here that windows they can be behind bushfire shutters, behind screens, less than 400 mm off the horizontal surface. The frames can be of bushfire-resisting timber or timber species from E2 or metal-reinforced UPVC. So it's not to say that we can't use timber. It's just that it's got to be a certain type of timber, which is essentially a kind of hardwood on that list E2. Okay, so there's many different Bell ratings, so different Bell ratings basically require different kinds of materials to conform. So Mr. Building Certifier has reminded us of this matter here. And then in Victoria, as in everywhere, we need a certificate of insurance before you can start. This is also included in the building permit. The construction insurance that is taken up by the builder. And then you have the sets of drawings that I have provided as part of the building approval process. So what I like to do is I like to give the building certifier the entire set of drawings. So then the actual building approval drawings will also act as the contract set. Okay, because the habit of some builders is to take the building permit drawings, get it all signed, put it in their safe, and then have another set which they use on site. So then there's a danger that what they're using on site is different to the actual permit set. So if you just use the permit set, then that takes out any sort of possible difference there, because you're making amendments to the actual set itself. So any amendments that you make, certain amendments don't need a further building approval, but other amendments do. So you need to actually track all those changes for the contract, which may also affect the building permit by superseding drawings. So basically what I'll do is I'll pull out pages. Well, I don't pull out any pages. I will just get the new pages and staple them to the old ones. So you have a record of the original thing, and then you have a record of the new thing. You can see that the development approval drawings, there was only 3 of them. But this one you can see that there's actually 22 of them. So there's a lot more here, because here we now need to then tell the builder how we want to build it and with what materials. I will point out though, what you will see is that this demolition plan and then this proposed plan, and then the sorry, it's taking its time. And then the elevations, which I will get to eventually. Okay, the elevations, the proposed plan, and then the proposed existing condition demolition plan are exactly the same drawing with more information added to it. Okay, and the reason for that is that the easiest way for the building certifier to tell whether or not we've got building approval, or whether our building approval application drawings are the same as our development approved drawings, is to basically take the development approval drawings, put them on the light table, and then put our building application drawings on top of it. And if they match up perfectly, then he knows that we're following what we're doing, what we're supposed to. But you see, on top of that, we have a whole stack of other things as well, which is a way of basically of us completely describing the project. So we have a roof plan, which actually shows us what the legal point of discharge is for the stormwater. Everything is we've got materials here, so I like to use an external finishes key, and then to put the keys on there. And there's very specific instructions to the builder. For example, here it says insulate existing roof as specified, and as per Energy Rater's report, on top of the 100 mil wool insulation bats that are already in there. This one we've already seen, but I have a lot more instructions here as to what to keep, what to remove, and what to do with what has been removed. So you can see here, this was a very low budget thing. This note here says carefully remove toilet, bath, vanity, and shaving cupboard, and light fittings, and store for clients, meaning that the builder can't just throw them away or recycle them or what have you, because the client actually wanted to reuse them. The proposed plan, you can see here that the that the building certifier is kind of expecting that architects always forget smoke alarms, so they have a special stamp, which is a smoke alarm stamp, and they also have a special stamp for waterproofing, and then for where safety glass is needed. So this just saves time. If I've missed it, then all they do is they just stamp it on the drawing as to what's required. So you can see here in my electrical plan, that's gone in there again. And then you can see that he's got all these stamps where necessary. So this one is actually about providing termite against termites in accordance with the standards. And every drawing has the permit number as and his stamp on it. So every drawing is then shown to be officially a permit drawing. This house was made out of sandwich panels, color bond on either side of polystyrene. So from what we were looking at last week, this kind of material is absolutely not appropriate for construction above 3 stories. Although this stuff doesn't burn, it does melt. So it does melt and fall apart, but it doesn't actually burn. So it's in fact better than the stuff they used on the La Crosse building and also the Grenfell Tower. You can see with these drawings, there's a lot more detail as to what's required, and it's very closely specified. You can see down here, there's notes about bracing and to see engineers' details. So I need to put in all the engineers' bits and pieces so I can be sure that it fits, as well as the engineer doing his bits and pieces. Door and window schedule, which and you can see here that I've got a note to say all doors and windows to conform to BEL 12.5 rating using alpine ash, mountain ash, or silvertop ash. So all these timbers actually go on that list. Okay, so I'll just flip through this quickly, but we don't talk about wet areas or cupboards in the planning drawings, but we do here so that the builder knows where to tile, where to waterproof, and so on and so forth. But also with the same set is construction details. So I'm very specific. So this is we need to actually give examples of waterproofing that we know will work for the building to basically cover our asses, according to Greg. So to demonstrate that we know how to waterproof it. And if the builder has a better idea as to how we can waterproof things, then all fine and well. We can consider his suggestions, and I'm always happy to look at better ways of doing things. But at least there is a sort of lowest common denominator thing that is safe, that I know will be waterproof. So I have to work all this. I have to work out at least one version of it, and but I'm always open to better ways of doing things, and I have to make an assessment of whether that's going to work or not. Also, part of this set is the structural engineer's drawing. So he has a few of his specifications there, and then he has his drawings to tell us where all the stumps are, how big the stumps are supposed to be, as you can see here, how deep they are, how wide the diameter is, the tie downs, the bearers, and so on and so forth. So he specifies everything. But of course, the architect still needs to know this and needs to draw all this stuff in the architectural drawings, just in order to make sure that everything works. Because the last thing you want to do is to have it not work for you. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll leave you guys to go and have a look at that. But the other thing that is very important is the specifications for the project. So while the drawings are describe how big everything is and where everything is supposed to go and the dimensions and so on and so forth, the specifications actually go through the specifics of what the materials are and how they're supposed to be fixed and so on and so forth. Okay, so I won't actually talk too much about this because we will have a lecture specifically on specifications by Richard Choi from NetSpec later in the semester. But I'll put this onto Canvas as well, so you guys know what you're looking at. Now, just to give you a sample as to what these Bell rating assessment things look like, you can see here that that I've applied for it, and it's got details about the site, but it also has a standard sort of procedure by which the registered rater then goes through the whole thing to actually give us an actual rating as to what it is, so that we know how to then specify the materials for our project. This was in the suburbs of Castlemaine, so it wasn't in the bush, but they had big fires, and it was kind of close to a golf course, which was considered a real fire hazard. So we needed to get the rating, to get it rated in order to find out what it is. So you can see here what he's done is he's done a 100-meter sort of radius from the subject site, just to show that there's nothing that within that radius which would be considered a very high fire risk, just a normal fire risk. Okay, and then finally, let me show you the energy rating on the thing. So, where are we? So essentially, with every project in Victoria nowadays, you need to go and send your drawings off to an energy rater with all the materials and insulation and etc., so that they can actually give you an energy rating. And it needs to hit a certain number of stars to be able to be compliant. So in here, basically what we have here is all their working method based on standard formulae, which are loaded on the first rate site. And then basically what we need to demonstrate is what the rating is after the works, and then what the rating was before. So the house, as it was a 2.2 star rated house, and then once you put on the renovation or the addition, then the entire house became 3.4 stars, and that was enough to get us building approval. So these things change all the time, year in, year out. It just gets there's more and more onerous requirements, rightly so, to make houses more sustainable. So, are there any questions on this? All right, so I will load all these documents onto the Canvas site. So what you can then do is cross-check what you've seen in Greg Breckenridge's lecture and against the documents. My habit is that I tend to be quite comprehensive in my documentation, and the reason I know this is a good thing is that generally when the projects go out for costing, they're comprehensive enough so that at least two of the tenderers will put in prices within 10% of each other. In fact, this particular house, it came in within $5,000 of each other, which is less than 5%. And the third builder was just having a go and came in $80,000 higher than the other two. So that's one way of showing how thorough you've been when the prices that come back are really close together, which just means that they've got a good thing to actually cost, and you've actually done it properly. Okay. So, do we need a break? No? Okay. Yes?
Go to the bathroom, but everyone else needs a break. Don't stop asking.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
I know that it was asked last week, but for the prison exams, will the content be on the Victoria requirements, just ACT requirements, or a mixture of all in Australia?
They'll be specific in the questions to be written specifically for one jurisdiction or another, and you'll be told which jurisdiction. But generally, that's not how I want to write the questions. So I might, if I do ask a question about certain jurisdiction, I will mention both jurisdictions. So it'll be like, in Victoria, they're called building surveyors. So which of the following are the name of the certifying person in the ACT? Building certifier, building expert, building hoo-ha, and building whatever. So my aim is really to ask a question for which there's very little vagueness in that way, because it's not fair for me to be expecting you to know stuff from both jurisdictions. So most of them will be about principles, but when it's about two jurisdictions, those two jurisdictions should be made clear. Yeah. Okay. Since someone's gone to loo, I might just zip out and have a quick sip of water, if that's okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I had burpees. What is it? Show there? Oh yeah, much better stuff. So I used to wear burpees to the office. So I started as a kid in the car. I was sweating every day.
I'm gonna write that.
And
then write a
there was some. I was taking the response and I just dropped over foods. Yeah, but
that's WA, so
you're actually like, so I went with
Can I ask everybody, have I loaded up the Excel spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness. So Karthik, you can just go and have a look at mine also. Yeah. All right. So, look, I know this stuff is quite dry, but it is stuff that is fundamental for practice, and really in terms of professional pride, it's important that we know this material, because we need to know either the answer, or we need to know how to find out the answer when we're talking to people. So for me, I'd like you guys to know about this, because I want you guys to be prepared in when you meet random people in dinner parties who might become your clients or what have you, as to the correct things to say or the correct response to give. Okay, because it reflects not only on you but also on the place in which you were educated. Okay, so and again, one of the things that I'm interested in here is really trouble we can get into, and we got to know what we can do in order to get into less trouble, or in terms of protecting ourselves, because we're no good to anyone if we're sitting in jail after having a building collapse on us, even though it wasn't our fault. Okay, so second lecture is really about development legislation and approvals. So we know already how the laws work in Australia, where there are three levels of law. So development legislation and development approvals that come under that legislation are mostly covered by state and territory laws. Okay, and we also know that development approval comes before building approval. We saw an example of what an approval looks like in the previous lecture. In some jurisdictions, development approvals are also known as planning permits, and building approvals known as building permits, but we know about that already. So, sorry, that it's not correct that aspects of building approvals will be covered in the next lecture, because they're actually covered in the last lecture and the one beforehand. So, what is development approval? This has come from the same website as what is building approval that we saw last week from planning.org. And what it is a legal document that allows one to undertake a development. Development approvals specify the design and other documents that the development must follow. So if you go back to my very small example of the backyard extension in the previous lecture, then really that forms a kind of basis of it, and you just scale up from there. Of course, there's many kinds of development approval, from not having to have a development approval right up to really onerous and complicated approvals that require a lot of conditions. Isn't that interesting? I've got my notes here. I haven't looked at it all day. Okay, so I guess in terms of in the context of architecture and construction, a good question to ask is what constitutes development. So it makes sense that anything that is new construction, anything like buildings or infrastructure or landscapes, those new things would constitute development. But really, it also relates to existing buildings, because any alterations and or additions to existing buildings, infrastructure, or landscapes are also considered development, as are the changing of the use of existing buildings, infrastructure, or landscapes. So anytime you do anything to a building, essentially, because you can imagine that changing the use of an existing building might not actually change the existing building at all, but it is still considered development, and therefore may need some sort of approval. So I won't really go through this so much, but this is really just a reiteration of what we spoke about last week in terms of three levels of government, being the executive, the administration, and the judiciary, and then also all of which are involved in making laws, and Greg also talked about that. But there's also three levels of laws in terms of the Commonwealth, the state and territory, and local governments. So Commonwealth and state governments have two assemblies. So we have the House of Representatives, which write laws, and then we have the Senate, which approve laws, and then those laws go from the House of Representatives, or the lower house, up to the Senate, who then approve laws or approve conditionally or reject laws, and they are then sent back to the House of Representatives to make amendments or to actually turn into law. The difference between the states and the territories and also local government is that the territories and local governments only have one assembly. And as we know, the levels of laws that local government and territory governments do are generally not quite as full on as state laws. And also, as we can see with the recent happenings in the news, territory laws can be overridden by the Commonwealth. So the big debate from a couple of weeks ago was the right to voluntary euthanasia, which was being debated, and basically the territories wanted to be able to make those laws, and the Commonwealth said no. So if we look at an architectural representation of this system, what we have here is the three levels, as you might in New South Wales or in Victoria. So you have the Commonwealth government represented by Parliament House on the top, and then the state parliament represented by the Victorian Parliament House on the bottom right, and then the South Melbourne Town Hall, which represents local government. So in the ACT, because of its size, and it is really the Northern Territory and the ACT only are territories rather than states because of the size of their populations, as opposed to their land area, because the Northern Territory is actually quite big. Okay, so here we see a representation of that Parliament House again, and then the next level down is the Territory Assembly Building in Canberra. So what this means is that the functions of local government are actually undertaken by the territory government in this case. Now, so in terms of laws that cover development in the ACT, we have two sets of plans here. We have the National Capital Plan, which is administered by the National Capital Authority, which is part of the Commonwealth government. Okay, and this is a kind of interesting thing. And then we also have the ACT Planning and Development Act, which includes the Territory Plan, which is administered by the Territory, by the Australian Capital Territory, by the ACT. The body that administers it is now known as the Environment Planning and Sustainable Development Directorate, otherwise known as EPSDD. But it used to be known as EPD 2 years ago, and then 3 years ago, and for many years backwards, it used to be known as ACTLA. So it's quite commonly still referred to as ACTLA, just because that's the last name that it had before it started changing acronyms every other year. So one set of laws generally overrides the other set of laws. So if you have a property that happens to be covered under both laws, then the National Capital Plan will override the Territory Plan. Now, this may seem like an odd thing and understandable in the context of Canberra because it's the nation's capital and a special case. However, there are many other examples in other jurisdictions where there are this kind of split jurisdiction over developments. Development regulations are generally state regulations that are implemented by local governments, right? So basically, you've got the Planning Act or the planning scheme, such as the Territory Plan and the Victorian Planning Scheme, which are written by the state governments and the local government. But it's local government that actually implement it. So follow its rules when development needs to be done. But in special cases, there are also certain zones that come under different jurisdictions. So one example of that in Sydney would be the Barangaroo precinct, which comes under the state government, not under the Sydney City Council. And in Victoria, the same thing happens. So the whole of the city of Melbourne actually comes under the state government, as well as the city of Melbourne. But when you've got really big projects, such as very tall buildings, very complex buildings, casinos and the like, the decision on whether or not to grant approval for those projects come under the state government, not the local government. Okay, so this is a way that the state governments get to influence the development of the capital, the state capitals. Now, if we go back to the ACT, the National Capital Authority and the National Capital Plan have a particular history. So as we know, this is a special city because it's a 20th century city. It's a city that was designed specifically for the car. It's a city that came out of a design process, as of a design competition process, which was won by Walter Burley Griffin. So when it was under construction between 1913 and 1920, it was basically Griffin himself that was here as the Federal Capital Director of Design and Construction before he moved on. And you can consider that to be the construction phase. After Griffin was moved on by the federal government, a body called the Federal Capital Advisory Committee came in to oversee the development of the capital and the implementation of the competition plan for 4 years, 1921-1924. From 1925 to 1930, that body actually changed to become the Federal Capital Commission for 6 years. And from 1931 to 1937, during the Great Depression, essentially during a time where they were trying to control the size of government, it came under quite a few different bodies. So we can see here that it's gone from being very specific and very deliberate in terms of the body or the person that controls it, right down to the point where it's becoming a political football which no one really wants to catch. And then from 1938 to 1957, you've got the National Capital Planning and Development Committee, which was one body which started to take control of things. From 1958 to 1989, the National Capital Development Commission was in control, and really this is the time in which I suppose you can say that Canberra actually matured as a city. So when I was a student, it was always really interesting to see what the NCDC was doing, and they were building a lot of stuff in Canberra in terms of new buildings and what have you, including Parliament House, which is the most recent one and one of the last things that the NCDC oversaw, but also the filling of the lake. So Lake Burley Griffin was basically a river going through a few low paddocks until 1963, when the Scrivener Dam was finally finished, and then they started filling it up. It took a year to fill up. So they started filling it in 1963, and in 1964 it filled up to where it is today. So what you can see here is that there's a lot of changes that have happened in that time. And for those of you who know Griffin's plan, and there's pictures of it everywhere, and for those and all of us live in Canberra, so when you're driving around Canberra, you can actually see that various pockets or sections of Canberra have gone off the plan. So Griffin's actual original plan has been modified over time to take into account different ideas about cities. So Weldon and Belconnen is one very obvious example. But so is somewhere like Yarralumla. Yarralumla in Griffin's plan was a paddock. Yeah, especially the bit, the bit near the golf course. So, I think what you can say is that this became too much for the federal government to do. So in 1989, the ACT territory. The ACT government was formed to take over a lot of these functions, the functions of local government, because before that time it was the federal government that was looking after the functions of local government. So up in Parliament House was where you had the person who was in charge of the rubbish collection in Canberra, in charge of the sweeping up the leaves, in charge of all these things which are usually done by local government, as well as all those things like subdivision of land, issuance of development approvals and building approvals, and all those things which are generally not done by the governments of countries. But having said that, from 1989 to the present day, it doesn't mean that the federal government relinquished control of all of Canberra to the ACT government. There is still a large part of Canberra that comes under the Commonwealth government, and the body that now controls the Commonwealth lands in Canberra is called the National Capital Authority. So, why do we have the National Capital Authority? Well, essentially, the National Capital Authority is tasked with preserving the main tenets of Griffin's plan, as well as improving Canberra for the future, to really sustain the culture and heritage in Canberra's planning and development. So it's there to make sure that no one goes and builds a hotel across Anzac Parade and interrupts the nice land access that you see there, for example. That's a kind of silly reason, but really what it is that it demonstrates that the Commonwealth is actually very proud of Canberra as a national capital and Griffin's design, and really has tasked the National Capital Authority and the National Capital Plan with conserving and promoting the capital. Also to look after designated areas, which we'll go into in a couple of slides, to outline the development, design, and planning guidelines for Canberra, to incorporate and maintain Griffin's fundamentals, and to make sure that the symbolism of the original winning competition entry is actually maintained moving forward. You can see here that it has also set itself a few new aims or few new roles, which are much more current. So to talk, it's about embracing sustainability, to set guidelines and contemporary guidelines for road systems, which is really one to maintain the Griffin idea, but also to bring everything up to contemporary standards and what have you. To guide appropriate land users. And by the way, none of this is to say that any of this stuff is particularly successful. It's just what this body does. Be flexible enough so that the territory land can be managed appropriately together with the national capital land. To maintain the open spaces, maintain the undeveloped hilltops, which were again part of Griffin's plan, very symbolic parts of Griffin's plan, and also to develop and preserve the central national areas. Now, those areas, those designated areas, there are two parts to it. The first part is really what you see in yellow here on the plan. So really what we're talking about here is the triangle with capital, with Parliament House in the middle, and then the bits around it, as well as the foreshore to the lake, all around the lake, and quite a few sort of green areas around it as well. So what this means is that if you want to do anything within this space, then you need to apply to the National Capital Authority for approval, because it comes on, it's a designated area under the National Capital Plan. Very importantly, it includes also the land axis. So you can see that this is yellow, but only the center of it here, and on either side it's not. And then of course all the way out to Mount Ainslie here. So we can't have anyone building something on the other side of Mount Ainslie that is going to be trying to cash in on the land axis, if you like. The center of the designated area not only covers the parliamentary triangle that I spoke about before, but also Anzac parade and the War Memorial, as well as the embassy area here in Yarralamla. Okay, which goes actually all the way down to it goes quite far in, up to down past Hopetoun Circuit in nearer to Deakin. Now, also in the National Capital Plan is an open space system which comes under the authority's jurisdiction. And when you bring together these parts of the ACT together with the yellow parts you saw 2 slides ago, you can see that actually the National Capital Authority still controls the majority of the ACT or of Canberra. It's only just the suburban areas and some of the commercial areas that come under the ACT government. So you'll need to apply for permission for development approval to do anything within the National Capital Plan area from the National Capital Authority, and because everything that because they have to assess everything against a number of criteria, they're called works approvals rather than development approvals. So you can see here that works are quite widely defined there. You've got basically construction, alteration, extension, even demolition of buildings and structures within the National Capital Plan zone, landscaping, cutting down trees, excavations, basically everything outside in that space you need permission to do. So if you wanted to move a park bench, if you wanted to dig a trench to lay to fix a broken water pipe, you would need permission from the National Capital Authority. So it's very, very onerous. So when we look at things like building new buildings, altering existing buildings, removal of dead trees, and so on and so forth, even down to installation of temporary structures. Let's say the little towers that the projectors sit on for the Enlighten Festival, all of those things need works approval, which is essentially a kind of development approval. So it's very, very onerous. This stuff this stuff is taken very, very seriously because of the symbolic quality of Canberra as the nation's capital. So. What happens outside those areas comes under the ACT Planning and Development Act, which is really to provide a planning and land system that contributes to the orderly and sustainable development of the ACT. So, like most planning jurisdictions, its roles are to the Directorate or ACPLA. The ACPLA's roles is really to administer the planning scheme, which is called the Territory Plan, which means that they have to review and propose amendments to the plan so that the thing always is always developed and to be relevant and current, but also to regulate the development of land. And to assess development approval applications and so on and so forth. So really, this is much more a kind of standard form of development application that you find in Melbourne or Sydney. Okay, and in the case of other cities, this is really the bulk of the planning approval or works is actually about the territory, not about the federal or the Commonwealth lands. So, like all legislation, you can go and look at the Territory Plan at the legislation.act.gov site. And the Territory Plan is really the main development document for the territory. The Territory Plan includes zones, structure plans, development codes, precinct codes, and estate development plans. So really, what it does is that the directorate, in consultation with the stakeholders, has sat down and decided where or where and how things need to be through zones. So what this means is that you've got different zones which are reserved for certain types of uses. All the hatch part on the bottom there actually comes under the National Capital Plan, so that's why you don't see this. So that's why it doesn't make up part of the territory plan. So the color codes for all of those are really laid out here with all the different kinds of zones, and each of those zones then have a series of regulations, written regulations, which are associated with it, which tell you what you can and can't do within that. So that's the zoning. Within the zoning area, then you can have what is called structure plans. So they may have specific areas within the territory zoning for which they have determined on a certain type of urban structure and design, land use, environment, etc., etc. So what you see on the right there is the Kingston Foreshore structure plan, where they have divided it into parts, which then controls how that area is then developed. With Lake Burley Griffin being up here, and this being the main kind of restaurant strip, I think. Now, what we also have is a series of development codes, similar to structure plans, except with much more detail in terms of what you can actually do. So with the structure plan, it's really about a more general idea as to what's allowable. But when you get to a development code, it really becomes very specific and actually names the kinds of things that you can do. So with this one, with the CZ1 core zone in the city, then it actually talks about only these uses can actually be used in it. Business agencies, clubs, communities, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole list there which I'll leave you to look at. But it also talks about light industry and how light industry is prohibited at ground floor level, and even earmarks where service stations can and can't go inside the city. So it's very, very specific. So nothing in the city actually happens by chance. Not only do they control the use, but they even control the form of it. And I think that's quite clear when you're on the Commonwealth Avenue bridge going towards the city. It's very clear that there's a specific height that all the buildings stop at. So there's height controls with those things. But not only that, in the city itself, there's actually setbacks, gradual setbacks from the street, which are about sort of maintaining solar access to the outside, and basically how cities or how certain buildings have to be set back in different streets. So obviously there are exceptions to this, and there's different rules for different streets. If you're on Bunda Street and you've got the 6 stories of the Canberra Centre right in front of you, that's obviously allowable there, but in other streets it may not be. It goes right down to really how a building is supposed to look in terms of its envelope, in terms of the limits of it. So this is highly, highly prescriptive in terms of what this development code can do. If you want to know a bit more about accessing, or if you want to know a bit more about the maps and the zones and what have you, go to the ACMAPI site there, which is actually quite an amazing facility. Most amazing about it is that it has yearly aerial photographs of Canberra, which are useful for all sorts of things, and much better than Google, because Google is about 5 or 6 years old. Google Maps. So, any development beyond the scope of the National Capital Plan may need to apply for development approval from ACPLA. And this, of course, is what ACPLA say. But the type of exempted developments are few and far between. They do say that some developments on some properties are exempt from development approval. This is an extremely narrow set of buildings, set of types or circumstances. And those that aren't exempted those that aren't exempted will need development approval to be applied for and given before anything can happen. Exempted developments include internal works, changing doors and windows, refinishing buildings, building maintenance, slight changes to roof pitch, chimneys, skylights, external shades, heater and cooler units, PV panels, temporary buildings and structures, garages, carports, sheds and decks and the like. So is there anything in that list which actually mentions a new building that we can live in, that we can use, that can be occupied? No. So in fact, they quite generously talk about this list of exemptions, but it's really incredibly narrow and incredibly restrictive. So the list of exempted developments in the ACT is based on, it's really about preserving Canberra's urban or suburban character. And what that means is essentially that the territory government wants control over every single thing that happens in the territory. So what we have here is a situation where you've got where you have the most over-regulated city in the most over-regulated country in the world. So really what happens there is that this is our reality if we are practitioners in Canberra. The requirements in Canberra are much more onerous than the requirements nearly anywhere else. People will complain till they're blue in the face about how hard it is to get development approvals in certain parts of inner Melbourne or Sydney. But that's not because of the rules. That's because the planning process has been politicized, and the head planner is now generally the mayor of the jurisdiction, who doesn't know what they're doing and writes in all these stupid planning schemes, which are then which they then realize that it's no good when someone applies for it. So what happens then is that to try and stop the developments from going ahead, they just refuse to actually give an answer as to a valid application. So in Canberra, we don't really have that. We just can't do anything without any permission whatsoever. Now, development applications will be assessed in three ways. Firstly, a code track, secondly, merit track, and thirdly, impact track. So what this means, it doesn't mean that you, it means that even the simplest things, even the simplest house or dwelling needs development approval. So basically, with code tracks, it's simple developments that meet all the appropriate rules within the territory plan. So if you've got building a single house on a large site with appropriate setbacks from each side, and everything conforms, you basically have to make an application, say it's code track, show them how it conforms to code track by basically doing all their work for them by going through the points 1 to 700 and demonstrating how it actually conforms to the rules, in which case they just have to tick, and it only takes them about 20 working days to go through all the work that you have already done to approve it. So this is your simplest way of doing things. But much more common is the merit track, and merit track is basically any development that does not meet all the relevant rules within the territory plan. And while this, you can imagine that this applies to multi-unit developments and large commercial developments, this also applies to single houses that don't meet all the relevant rules within the territory plan. So they say that the time frame for assessing merit track applications is between 35 to 45 working days, and certainly I believe it can happen within those time frames. if everything goes well, that is. But the problem with having many layers of regulation is that many things can go wrong. Many things can go wrong. So, that's also got to do with the way that Canberra's land tenure is arranged. So there's really two different kinds of land tenure, which means how one owns land. One is freehold, which means that if you have the title to the land, you own it forever until you choose to dispose of it or your descendants choose to dispose of it. Okay, so that is what is called freehold land. There's rules about how much of the land you actually own. So you only technically own 600 mil down from the surface of the land. Anything below still belongs to the Commonwealth. So if they find that there's large deposits of titanium down there, then they can actually take back the underside of the land and make life so unpleasant for you that eventually you get jacked and sell it back to them. But that is what's called freehold. So it's pretty much you own that 600 mil of earth from the surface down forever or until you choose to dispose of it because it's too unpleasant. The other way the other form of land tenure is called leasehold land, as opposed to freehold land. And what leasehold land is that you get a lease from the jurisdiction that controls the land for a certain period of time. So in Canberra, all private land in Canberra is leasehold land. So what you're doing there is you're entering into a lease agreement, much like you might go and rent a flat, with the territory government to have that piece of land for a certain period of time, 100 years, 60 years, whatever it is. And really, in a sensible, rational place like Canberra, despite the fact that it's got lots of rules, those kinds of things are generally respected because the territory government knows that if they change the lease conditions too much, that there'll be a revolt in the electorate and they'll get voted out. In other jurisdictions, such as in Malaysia, where everything is also leasehold, what tends to happen there is depending on how a certain area is developing and in terms of land values and general progress, they will choose to renew the lease with certain premiums or not. Let me say this, there's always premiums, it's just a matter of how high there is. So this doesn't happen here. There is cost involved in renewing a lease, but it's pretty much as of right because of the way our particular Australian political system works. Okay, so let me give you an example and complications of a duplex in Deakin. So let me go to this drawing here. So what you can see here is a street, a McGregor Street in Deakin, and what you have is you have a pair of duplexes which used to be owned by the government. This one is still owned by the government here. Now, what you can see is that on this side you've got what's known as a drainage easement, and on this side you've got what's known as a sewerage easement. And you can see that the sewerage easement, if I zoom in, you can see that the sewerage easement actually starts with next door and goes across the back of this house and then goes down here and into the connection in the street. So how they used to do things is because they wanted to minimize the number of connections to the stormwater and to the sewer, is that for every two houses they would actually share the sewer pipe. So it means that the sewer pipe of next door actually comes in here and goes around there. And in order to protect the people who live in this house over here, what they needed to do was to create an easement. Now, an easement is a technical instrument which reserves the land for the use of a sewer. Okay, so it means that the owner of this house can't just go and dig up next door's sewer pipe and block it, and meaning that all or their excrement won't have anywhere to go. So it's really about protecting access to the sewer. So the sewer is the sewer, shared sewers, common sewers, private sewers, all of those things come under the control of ACTU, what is now known as Icon Water. So when the person who wanted to buy this property was looking at it and saw that easement, they thought, okay, this is a problem. So no wonder no one wants to buy it, because otherwise it's 525 square meters, reasonable sized piece of land. It's got a party wall, that's okay. And so that person then rang up ACLA and said, okay, what's the restrictions of this? And ACLA said, well, it's got a party wall and it's under 600 square meters, so you need a development approval if you want to do anything outside of the existing walls. And so the prospective buyers, smart as they were, said, what about the sewerage easement? Can we build over the sewerage easement? ACLA advised the prospective buyer that the sewerage easement came under the jurisdiction of Icon Water. Icon Water. So prospective buyer then brings up Icon Water and says, look, I've got this sewerage easement here, so what's the deal with building over it? So Icon Water says, why don't you go and buy yourself a drainage plan from this department of ours, and then see where the sewer actually is, and then we will make a determination. But if there is no shared sewer in this, then we have no objection. So you can see what's happening here, right? You've got a guy that the buyer is talking to on the phone, that's telling you to talk to the guy sitting onto the desk next to him to buy a couple of maps so they can send it back to the first person to prove to them a document that comes from their own department. Okay? Never mind. You want me to do it? Sorry, the buyer to do it? The buyer will do it. So the buyer does it, prospective buyer does it, and then sends it off to the first person, and the first person advises them that they have no objection to any extension being built over the easement, because the drainage plans, the sewer plans clearly show that actually ACTU had been in sometime in the 70s and given each house its own sewer connection back to the street. Buyer's happy. Put in a bid. Buy the house. We know something no one else knows. And also buyer happens, as I've already given it away, happens to be an architect who is not afraid of doing a renovation or two, because in a previous life that was done. So buyer goes in, buys the house, and renovates the entire inside, so that buyer and family can move in there. So what buyer ends up with is really a 1-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, with the second bathroom opening up to the garden where the extension is going to go. So after all this, buyer does the plans for an extension of 2 rooms at the back to turn the whole thing into 2 bathrooms, 3 bedrooms, and applies to ACLA. ACLA says, ACLA within the 35 days or whatever, despite the fact that buyer has done all their work for them by getting all the criteria and making sure that it's easy for them to check, ACLA gets back to buyer and says, you're building over an easement, and the easement is in the easement belongs to next door, so you have to get permission from next door to build over the easement, and so buyer, thinks, this is bullshit. What's happening here? Buyer rings up ACLA and says, this is bullshit, what's happening here? ACLA says, well, I know we said all of this, but when we put this through the system, this easement triggered something, which meant that the application went to the leasing department, and the leasing department are the ones that look after easements. So buyer says to ACLA, but in my application, Icon have said that they have no assets in there and they have no objection to this. They've stamped the drawings. You have the stamped drawings. ACLA says, yes, okay, well, Why do you think it's there? Buyer says it's a sewerage easement and sewer has changed. So Eckler says, yes, that's pretty dumb. So let us talk to leasing. So Eckler talks to leasing, and basically what has happened is Actu, Icon, have come in and done new plumbing for everybody, but have not extinguished their easement like they're supposed to. So what happens now is that basically buyer has to get the agreement of next door, which is fine. Next door is under the jurisdiction of Department of Housing, rational people, not under the jurisdiction of some emotional house owner who doesn't understand things and will say no to everything. So that's good. So we can go and get permission from next door to build over the easement. So that's the first step. The other thing we need to do is that next door need to come in on the application to actually build over, to actually do our renovation. So next door has to apply to do the renovation as well. And not only that, next door and buyer have to then go and get the land resurveyed so that we can see where to put the easements. Because of course plumbing needs to go somewhere. But there's no plumbing in there. So this is essentially where we're at. So buyer's wife is darkening because he's hasn't gone through and done all this crazy paperwork to get a said extension done, and therefore most of buyer and wife's gear remains in storage. So where do we go from here? Well, what we have to do essentially is we have to follow the instructions of leasing and basically go through the tortuous process of essentially removing the easements. Okay, but you can see here that why all these structures exist in order to protect everybody. But you can also see that just because you have bucket loads of regulation doesn't mean that things will actually happen in an orderly way. In fact, more regulation just ends up in more people needing to do more things. More complication basically means that more things can go wrong. So buyer is very glad that this is buyer's own house and not something that he recommended that a client do. Can you imagine the bloody diabolical stripe that I'd be in? I'd be on the bloody phone to my professional indemnity insurers like once a week if I had recommended that the client buy this piece of land. So buyer is actually happy that he's only in the pool with his wife and not with the client, because his wife's got no choice at the moment. Okay, so moving right along, if we go back to this, so part of this was that basically we needed to go through merit track to put in for the development application, and that's the thing, is that you never know, you're not actually told what the triggers are within that piece of land. So nowhere is it published that leasing needs to approve anything that happens on this piece of land. I went to Eckler twice, noted everything. They even admitted that they had no idea that this happened. So how can this bloody happen? It happens. Okay, so regulation doesn't mean that things are going to happen properly. Okay, the third development application track is impact track. So this really applies to developments that have a major impact on the environment. And of course takes a lot longer to do, and it's advertised to the public, who can then object to your application. But really, what needs to be involved in impact track is that the Environmental Protection Agency need to have their say, as well as qualified people to prepare environmental and other kinds of impact statements. So an example of this would be the Kingston Foreshore developments. Which was really, what was it like before they built all this stuff? Was it just a swamp? It was. Okay, so it's so basically when they when they applied to for development approval to develop that site, they would have had to do a fairly comprehensive environmental impact statement to demonstrate that the development was not going to adversely affect the environment, meaning the health of the lake. But also they would have had to do a whole stack of other impact statements, traffic, economic, etc., to demonstrate that this project was actually going to do good things for the area rather than damage the area. So you can imagine this is the most onerous form of development approval. But in some cases, I tell you, I bet you that one of these impact track bloody projects gets up before my stupid renovation is finished. But that's neither here nor there. So those are the three different approval tracks. So what you guys should do is go and have a look at the ACLA website to just get a bit more information about these three tracks in terms of the kind of specific wording of stuff, and just get it clear in your mind what they mean. Alrighty, are there any questions about development approvals in Australia and the ACT? That's it? Very good. Okay. Time now is 5:05, so we're making good time. So let's move into tutorial mode. So what happened last week? Did I start here and then move my way around? I did. You guys were last, weren't you? Okay, so I'll go to you guys first, and then move around. Any questions about the? Let's just start with questions that might be shared amongst everybody. Does anyone have any questions about the assignments at the moment? Anyone want to, general things that you might want to do, or that you might need to know, or is it all specifically about your particular ideas? Okay, now for those of you who have drafts to give me, you can either give them to me today, and we can talk about them, or you can email them to me when you have them, and then I can mark them up and send them back to you. So let me just let's just have a 5-minute pit stop, and I'll stop the recording, and then we'll get going again.